It's time for the biggest story of the day. This is What Made the Cut with JJ and Alex on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
And, of course, this portion of the show brought to you by the good folks at the Doug Smith family of dealerships. Whether it's a Dodge, Chevy, Jeep, Ram, Subaru, Kia, or now Mitsubishi, found in American Fork and Spanish Fork and the Kia dealership in Linden. It's nobody knows cars like Doug. Eric Spyropoulos joining us here on the program, Utah Jazz writer for NBA.com. Eric, thanks for being with us on the program, man.
Thanks for having me.
Any surprises in the first rounds of the NBA playoffs so far? If so, what stood out to you about this? I guess everything's chalk except for that one matchup now between the 6th-seeded Timberwolves and the 7th-seeded Golden State Warriors in the West.
Yeah, I mean, I think there weren't too many surprises to me. I think if you had to look at a surprise, it'd probably be like Minnesota winning in 5 games over the Lakers versus 6 or 7 games. But the way the Timberwolves are playing, you know, I would actually expect them to beat the Warriors and make it to the conference finals. I think they're playing with a lot of confidence. They have a lot of depth. And they got a true number one guy in Anthony Edwards. So across the board, I don't think there were too many surprises. I think a lot of people expected the veteran Warriors team to overcome the youth of the Rockets, which happened. And I think that Nuggets-Clippers series was probably a 50-50 split between, you know, which team people expected to win. And the Nuggets winning, you know, Game 7 at their home court wasn't too much of a surprise.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on the 4 matchups now outside of what you just mentioned about the Timberwolves? Are you expecting any upsets with these, or is it going to be chalk?
I think if we're looking at a series, I think there are 2 series that could have some upsets. I think, you know, Indiana winning Game 1, not to say that just because they won Game 1, they can go on and win this series, but, you know, it came out today that I think Kenny Atkinson said that he has concerns over not only Darius Garland, who's missed the past 2 games for them, but Evan Mobley and DeAndre Hunter, both joining him on the injury report. And so if they can't play a Game 2 or even a Game 3, you're looking at a Pacers team that now probably has the talent advantage if the Cavs are shorthanded. And I think, you know, the Pacers are a dangerous team. I mean, they've got a really explosive offense. They've been much improved defensively over the past year or so. And then in the West, OKC has been great. And I think I would probably pick the Thunder to win this series against the Nuggets. But I still believe that Nikola Jokic is the best player in the world. And when you have the best player in the world, sometimes that can be the difference. And I think he has a much easier matchup against OKC's front court than he did going up against Zubac and the Clippers.
When you see this type of movement with coaches that are getting fired after, you know, a year or 2, or even like a year or 2 removed from being coaches of the year or winning a title, seeing the Will Hardy extension that was announced and to see that through 2031, what type of a difference does that make for this organization? Obviously, it differentiates them, I think, from some of these bigger markets that are so quick to fire guys. What has Will Hardy done that has been so impressive for this ownership to say, you know what, we want you here for a lot longer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge deal for the Jazz as they're continuing on this building process. I think the biggest thing so far that Will has done has actually been able to lay the foundation for not only, you know, how the team's going to play, his system, but also just the overall culture and approach to this phase for the organization. And I think when you're developing a lot of young players and adding more each year and each off season, the most important thing is to have that kind of stability as you're growing those players and growing the team's foundation. You know, if you're cycling through coaches, you know, like De'Aaron Fox, I remember, you know, when they fired Mike Brown in Sacramento, I think Doug Christie became his like 6th or 7th head coach that he had in the league already. And obviously he's turned into a really great player, but as you're, you know, in the early stages for a team as they're, you know, in the building process, you want to have that stable leading voice. And Will Hardy, you know, from all accounts has gotten players to buy in and compete. And so, you know, having that for the foreseeable future makes a huge difference for the Jazz as they're, you know, advancing in this process.
And what does it say about the organization that they're committed that long to him? Because we're looking around the league and you're seeing coaches getting fired left and right. We had Mike Malone fired in the last week of the regular season. What message are the Jazz sending with this extension to the league and to everybody that follows NBA basketball?
I mean, I think it's a message of confidence in Will, and I also think it's kind of a reflection of how they view Will in the league as a head coach. I think that the Jazz front office, and I think there are plenty of other people around the league that view Will, not only as a really good, X's and O's guys, really good communicator, a really good leader right now, but he's also still just 37, one of the youngest coaches in the league. And so I think it's a message of confidence in him in terms of what he's already able to do as a head coach right now, but also looking forward and seeing that, we think he's a great coach right now, but we're going to give him this platform, this runway to build with this group. And we think he can be an even better head coach down the road.
What are some of the things that are kind of like when you see this type of a move? I think we looked at it and we were kind of like, well, does it match up with the timing? Do you think he was chatted with by the folks in San Antonio or whatever that might be? Because obviously he's part of that Greg Popovich. We were looking at a TV graphic just now. I know JJ, you probably just saw it.
Yeah.
Like 1,000 coaches, obviously, that have been part of that Greg Popovich tree, but. Do you think Will Hardy was considered for that gig, and that might have precipitated maybe a look and say, hey, let's extend this guy right now?
I mean, I think it's certainly possible. I think the Spurs timing of everything, how they, Popovich announced that he wasn't returning as head coach, and then I think it was 20 minutes later that Mitch Johnson was announced as the full-time head coach. I think that timing was interesting. Because you never know what kind of conversations were had, but behind the scenes, did the Spurs look into? I mean, as you said, if the Spurs wanted someone from the Popovich tree, they could have probably picked anyone from all 30 teams. There's probably someone who's under that Popovich tree. So I mean, it's potentially safe to assume that maybe the Spurs did have initial conversations with people around the league, head coaching candidates to see if there would be any interest. I do think there is a timing thing that. Can be interesting on the surface, but also with how quickly the Spurs seem to tab Mitch Johnson as their head coach, maybe seems a little bit likely that Will was privately and publicly, just as committed to the Jazz as he says he was.
Monday is going to be could be one of the most important days in Utah Jazz history. We will see. It could be one of the most devastating days in Jazz history, depending on how the ping pong balls come out. And we know the lottery is coming up on Monday. This is a big deal. The Jazz have been waiting for this opportunity. If they don't win the lottery, obviously everyone's going to be disappointed. But is there a reason for optimism if they don't? Are there players out there besides Cooper Flagg that can help them get better?
Absolutely, I think so. And I do think it would be really healthy for Jazz fans to go into Monday understanding that there's only a 14% chance of number one. Just want to set the expectations low so that if it does happen, you feel even better,
Well, what JJ likes to point out is he's like, 14% chance to get number one, 50% chance to fall all the way down to 5. So that's great.
Yeah, exactly. The single most likely outcome is the 5th pick. But, 52% chance of top 4. So either way, yes, I do. There are, I think there are players outside of Cooper Flagg that are really good, really dynamic players. I think if you fall to 2 and you get a guy like Dylan Harper, I think that could be a really good potential lead creator in the backcourt. Ace Bailey is one of those, rare wings that can take over the game with his scoring. And there are guys, obviously you don't want to fall. I think the top 3 obviously is where you want to be. If you fall to 4 or 5, there are guys, it gets a little bit more interesting in terms of the decision you have to make. But I do think outside of Cooper Flagg, there are a few guys in that top 4 that still could be huge difference makers.
When you look at some of what the lottery looks like this year, we also start to look at next year. Is what Detroit did, is that a little bit more along the lines likely of what could happen with the Jazz? I do think that going from 17 wins to 14 wins to pushing the Knicks in the year after that in the playoffs is kind of a high bar. What's the reality of a rebuild look like in the NBA these days?
I think there's a huge difference. I think what Detroit did obviously had basically never been done before in tripling their win total in 1 year. I do think there's a huge difference in, just going to say it, playing in the Eastern Conference versus the Western Conference. The depth of the Western Conference, I think, is just much stronger than the East. And so I think that allows a team like Detroit to add a couple of veterans, get younger players continuing to develop, and then kind of, make a head coaching change and then strike that kind of luck there and have everything work in their favor. I do think that's possible, maybe not to that extent in the Western Conference. I do think a lot of it for the Jazz specifically will, again, go back to the lottery. If you do add a player like Cooper Flagg, who a lot of people project to be, pretty good on day one potentially, do you keep a lot of your veteran players and see more growth from the other young players, and then all of a sudden you're looking at a team that's in the mid-30s of wins? I mean, the Jazz have won in the 30s Will Hardy's first 2 seasons in the league. So I do think it's possible for a turnaround like that, but I do think tempering expectations given the Western Conference and also just given the likelihood that they don't end up with Cooper in the lottery makes it less likely.
And we're putting a lot of focus on the lottery, and I think that it's tough to ask any other Jazz questions until we know the result of that. But there are a lot of things that they have to do this offseason. You got a draft coming up, as we mentioned, but there's a couple free agents, there's trades, all the kind of stuff. What are some of the things that, besides the lottery coming up, that you're looking at for the Utah Jazz this summer you want to keep an eye on that fans should really be locked in and follow?
Yeah, and I think, outside of the draft, which is going to be probably the most significant event of the entire offseason for the Jazz, just because they have not only that top pick, but also they have 3 other picks in the draft. I do think you look at the veterans on the roster, Colin Sexton, Jordan Clarkson, John Collins, Lauri Markkanen to a lesser extent, and seeing, what happens with those players. Like I said, again, depending on the direction of the draft, is there a chance that they stick around and the Jazz start competing a little bit more and winning more games? Or on the other hand, are there teams out there, that are desperate to add, a veteran difference maker? Like an Orlando Magic. Do they really need a really good shooting guard like Colin Sexton? Do they make an offer? I think there's 2 directions, obviously, the Jazz can go. And which direction they go, obviously, will say a lot about what happens next season.
Eric Spyropoulos, he covers the Utah Jazz, NBA.com. You can read his byline there. When you're looking also in the offseason, what are some potential moves that the Jazz, in terms of roster, what's a changeover look like from year to year with a roster like this where you're looking at a bunch of guys that may or may not have a future with the team? What's a likely turnover, maybe not necessarily in terms of the people there, but maybe even a number of guys you're going to not see on that bench with the Jazz anymore?
It's a good question. I mean, there's probably in every offseason probably at least a minimum of 2 to 3 guys that change over on every roster towards the end of the bench, I'd say. I mean, the Jazz are in a pretty rare situation where they do have the majority of this year's roster under contract for next season. And then there are a few guys that have team options or non-guaranteed contracts, specifics like that. So there is a scenario. Obviously, the Jazz are going to add at least 1 to maybe upwards of 4 young players through the draft. So I do think there is going to be a turnover of a few guys on the bench, but there is definitely a scenario where you're looking at, the same top 12 or top 13 guys maybe from last year sticking around to next season.
Eric, we appreciate it. The breakdowns are always very good for us to be able to kind of at least get into the draft or the lottery, the draft lottery next week for us to kind of have some reality expectations. We've been trying to tell ourselves that, but there's always that part of you that creeps up that thinks, yeah, but why not us? Why not this team? Why not this lottery?
We're all preparing for our hearts to be broken.
It's fine. We know how this thing goes. Eric, we appreciate it, man. We'll chat with you again.
Thanks for having me.
There you go.